Stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the man from Leng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On today's episode, I am reviewing the player cards from Lost in Time and Space, the final Mythos pack in the Dunwich Legacy cycle. There are 12 new player cards in this pack. Many of them are extremely powerful and cost a lot of experience points, so I'm looking forward to delving into those. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing, so with that warning, let's get started. The first Guardian card in the pack is the level 2 version of Vicious Blow from the core set. It's a skill with 2 combat icons and the practiced and expert traits. It has the game text, if this skill test is successful during an attack, that attack deals +1 damage, +2 damage instead if it succeeds by 2 or more. Now, all of the class skill cards from the core set have received upgrades during the Dunwich Legacy cycle, and the Guardians finally get theirs in Lost in Time and Space. Vicious Blow is played in virtually every Roland and Zoe deck, as well as many Schizo Tool decks. Some of the Dunwich investigators even take it to shore up their damage output, which is a testament to the card's power. Now, while you don't get the +2 damage bonus automatically, Roland and Zoe shouldn't have any problem succeeding by 2 or more, considering some of the weapons that are available to them at this stage of the game. If Roland and Zoe pitch this card to a combat test while they're equipped with a shotgun, for example, they're sitting at 9 combat, which should be enough to succeed by 2 or more against most enemies on standard difficulty. They are also going to do a hell of a lot of damage. Even Skids will be tempted to upgrade to the level 2 version of Vicious Blow if he's using a weapon like the 41 caliber Derringer from the core set or the level 2 version of Switchblade from Essex County Express. Both of those weapons reward you for succeeding by 2 already, so tossing a copy of Vicious Blow into the mix is a no-brainer. There's not much else to say about the level 2 version of Vicious Blow. It's not absolutely essential, so if you're tight on experience, you can probably pass on this card in favor of a better weapon. But if you want to eke out as much damage as possible against enemies, you're going to stick this in your deck and you won't look back. The next Guardian card in the pack is Monster Slayer. This event costs only 1 resource to play, but a whopping 5 experience points to put in your deck. It has combat and wild icons and the spirit trait, and it has the game text Fight. If this attack succeeds against a non-elite enemy, defeat that enemy. Now, one of the most important things to note about this card is that it is a fight action. That means Roland and Zoe can't use their weapons in conjunction with this card. If they want to take down a non-elite enemy in one shot, they're going to have to roll up their sleeves and do some good old-fashioned bare-knuckle brawling. Of course, you can always boost your combat skill using talents or pitch cards to the skill check. So taking down an enemy with a weapon, without a weapon, isn't as hard as it may seem at first. Now, defeating an enemy with 1 attack is an extremely powerful ability. The big question here is whether it's worth the 5 experience points. And I think there are several circumstances where this card shines. First, Monster Slayer gives Roland and Zoe a type of action advantage, depending on the health of the enemies they're facing. If they're trying to take down the Servant of the Lurker or the Conglomeration of Spheres from the Dunwich Legacy, for example, Monster Slayer could save them anywhere from 2 to 5 actions. It could also save them a fair amount of ammo if they're relying on guns for combat. That's not bad for 5 experience points, considering rogues need to pay 6 for Ace in the Hole from Where Doom Awaits. However, most run-of-the-mill enemies have fairly low health, which mitigates the benefit of Monster Slayer somewhat. The second reason you might want to consider putting Monster Slayer in your deck is to deal with enemies that have dangerous combat abilities. Examples of this include the Conglomeration of Spheres, which discards melee weapons, or the Crazed Shoggoth from Where Doom Awaits, which can kill an investigator outright if allowed to live for too long. Monster Slayer kills these enemies before they have a chance to wreak havoc. That said, enemies like the Conglomeration of Spheres and the Crazed Shoggoth are fairly rare at the moment, No doubt we'll see more enemies with dangerous abilities or enemies that are immune to traditional weapons in future expansions, so Monster Slayer's value will continue to rise with each release. The third reason you might want to consider packing Monster Slayer is if you're playing on hard or expert difficulty. When you're playing on hard or expert, the fewer skill tests you do, the better, and Monster Slayer slashes the number of pulls you need to make from the Chaos Bag, which is a good thing when there's a -8 floating around in there that could ruin your day. Still, 5 experience points is a lot to ask, which makes me think Roland and Zoe will need to make a choice between upgrading their machetes to shotguns or lightning guns, or keeping their machetes and falling back on Monster Slayer for spot removal of potentially dangerous enemies or enemies with high health totals. Perhaps we'll see a Guardian in a future expansion, Lily Chen, who can use traditional weapons, in which case Monster Slayer could become a critical component of their combat package. Monster Slayer is extremely powerful, but I don't think it's an essential addition to Guardian decks, especially if you're packing the next card in this pack. The final Guardian card in the pack was spoiled months ago by FFG, and it doesn't disappoint. This is Lightning Gun. For 5 experience points, you get a 6-cost asset with an intellect and combat icon. It has the item, weapon, and firearm traits. It comes with 3 ammo and takes up both hand slots. And it has the game text action. Spend 1 ammo, fight. You get +5 combat for this attack. This attack deals +2 damage. Roland and Zoe have gotta love that Yithian technology. The obvious comparison here is with the shotgun from the core set and the Springfield M1903 from Undimensioned and Unseen. The lightning gun is slightly more expensive than the shotgun in terms of experience and resources, but it does come with more ammo and a higher combat boost. It has the potential to do more damage than the lightning gun, about 2.5 damage per experience point compared to 1.5 damage per experience point for the lightning gun. But the lightning gun's damage output is much more reliable, particularly at higher levels of difficulty. Between the +5 combat boost and the +2 damage, lightning gun is probably a better choice if you're playing on hard or expert difficulty. Pair the lightning gun with the level 2 version of Vicious Blow we saw earlier in the pack, and Roland and Zoe are sitting at 11 combat with the potential to do 5 damage. Even Yog-Sothoth itself won't be able to stand up to that kind of firepower for long. The lightning gun is a tad expensive, and you'll probably want to pick up some extra ammunition from the core set to fuel it, but once it hits the table, you'll be able to light up almost every boss in the game. If you're playing on standard difficulty or you're tight on experience, I think the shotgun is still a perfectly suitable option for your investigator. The first Seeker card is the only level 0 card in this Mythos pack. This is Dr. William T. MALESON, working on something big. He's a 1-cost asset with a willpower icon and the ally and Miskatonic traits. He has the response, when you draw an encounter card, exhaust Dr. William T. MALESON and place one of your clues on your location. Cancel the drawing of that card and shuffle it back into the encounter deck. Then draw a new card from the top of the encounter deck. Dr. William T. MALESON takes up the ally slot, and he has 2 health and 2 sanity. Dr. William T. MALESON is the first card since Word of Protection from the core set that gives you a way to manipulate the card you draw from the encounter deck during the Mythos phase, and that ability alone makes this guy worth considering in a lot of decks. The fact that he only costs 1 resource and has 2 health and 2 sanity is just icing on the cake. Roland Banks would gladly drop a clue for a chance to avoid a rotting remains, while Daisy or Rex would do the same to avoid a potentially dangerous enemy. Corpse Chill about to ruin MALESON's day? Shuffle it back into the encounter deck and try again. You do need to draw a replacement encounter card, but your chance of drawing the same card is quite small, especially if the encounter deck is large, like it is in a scenario like Where Doom Awaits. It's important to note that MALESON also allows you to avoid cards with Surge. As we'll see later in this pack, Mystics need to spend 5 experience points for the same privilege. Now, dropping a clue might seem like a high price to pay for the Doctor's ability, but it isn't necessarily the end of the world. In certain situations, dropping a clue can be advantageous. FBones173 over on Reddit came up with several interesting uses for Dr. William T. Maleson's ability. For example, Roland can use the Good Doctor to drop a clue at a low shroud location so he can investigate to remove his signature weakness, Cover Up. As you probably know, if there are no clues left on the table, you're basically boned because you cannot get rid of Cover Up just by investigating a location without clues. An investigator can also use the Doctor during the House Always Wins to offload clues at a location like the darkened hall before resigning at the back alley, potentially earning yourself an extra victory point. As most players have discovered, if you resign at the back alley with a clue on your investigator, you do not get that victory point from the back alley. Dropping a clue at a location also turns on cards such as Preposterous Sketches from Blood on the Altar and Inquiring Mind from Undimensioned and Unseen, both of which require clues to be at a location. And I'm sure players will discover many more uses for the Doctor as more cards are released. This is the first of several cards that will give investigators from all classes a way to interact with the encounter deck, and I think he stands up fairly well. Forewarned, which will be released in the Unspeakable Oath in the Path to Carcosa cycle, costs an experience point and lets you cancel only the revelation effect of a treachery. A Test of Will from the same Mythos pack also costs an experience point and comes with the revelation effect limitation. It also requires you to exile Test of Will, which will add up over the course of a campaign. And it's important to note that neither of those cards give you a way to deal with Surge. Seekers have received a lot of great cards in this cycle, and William T. Maleson is just another one for the pile. A cheap ally with an extremely powerful ability, Maleson is going to show up in a lot of investigator decks. He competes for the ally slot with Dr. Mylan Christopher, of course, but he only costs one resource, so if you're not really losing very much if you need to discard him and replace him with Dr. Mylan Christopher at some point during a scenario. The second Seeker card in the pack is Deciphered Reality. It's a 4-cost event that costs 5 experience points. It has 2 intellect and 1 willpower icon and the insight trait. It has the game text Investigate. The difficulty of this skill test is equal to the highest shroud value among revealed locations in play. If you succeed, discover 1 clue from each revealed location in play. I wasn't entirely sure what to make of Deciphered Reality when I first read the card, and the more I thought about it, the more I started to like it. Basically, Deciphered Reality is a form of action advantage for Seekers, allowing them to compress several Investigate skill tests into a single skill test, as long as there are a lot of revealed locations in play. Deciphered Reality's ability to compress skill tests makes it particularly appealing to players who enjoy hard or expert difficulty. Just keep in mind that Deciphered Reality is an Investigate action, so you can't use your flashlight with it. Deciphered Reality is one of those cards that will be absolutely amazing in a scenario, or you're going to pitch it to a skill test, depending on the scenario and player count. That said, you can pull off some truly amazing tricks with this card in the right scenario. Take the Midnight Masks from the Night of the Zealot campaign from the core set, for example. A copy of Deciphered Reality can help Daisy and Rex dismantle this scenario in record time. All you need to do is pick a route that reveals as many locations with 1 clue as possible. For example, you could race from your house to Rivertown to Southside to St. Mary's Hospital and up to Miskatonic University. If you can use cards like Shortcut to speed up your movement, all the better. If you can pass an Intellect 4 Investigate skill check, you discover 5 clues. Now, if you pitch a copy of Deduction to that skill check, you can pick up the 6th clue at Miskatonic University, clearing 5 locations with 1 skill test and earning yourself a victory point to boot. You can pull this type of trick in solo, although it's not without risks. Failing the skill check would be a huge tempo hit that might end up losing you the game. In multiplayer, your fellow investigators can help reveal the locations for you, although Deciphered Reality alone probably won't be enough to clear them. You could also pull off this trick in the Devourer below, which features a lot of locations with one clue. Deciphered Reality could also help pick up all the clues dropped by the Rougarou in the Curse of the Rougarou standalone scenario. You just have to keep in mind in that one that you can only discover clues on revealed locations. Now, one of the potential problems with Deciphered Reality is its cost, particularly in solo play. 4 resources is a lot to pay for an event. Now, normally 4 resources wouldn't be a problem for a Seeker with Myelin Christopher in his or her corner. However, Myelin Christopher rewards you for passing a lot of Investigate skill checks, while Decipher Reality rewards you for doing the exact opposite. So it's going to be interesting to see whether solo Seekers can generate enough resources to warrant playing Deciphered Reality in their decks. So how does Deciphered Reality fare in the Dunwich Legacy campaign if you're playing solo? Well, it's not nearly as explosive as it can be in the Midnight Masks or the Devourer below. The exhibit hall mechanic in the Miskatonic Museum limits the number of clues Deciphered Reality can discover in that scenario, and you're going to have to pitch it to a skill test in the Essex County Express because you can only discover clues on one location at a time. You can certainly play it in Blood on the Altar, although I think that scenario's mechanics don't really lend themselves to it. Generally, in that scenario, you want to stay at one location until you can clear all the clues from it and reveal the encounter card beneath it. I think Deciphered Reality is a good option in Undimensioned and Unseen. Now, most of the locations revealed in Where Doom Awaits have only one clue on them, although you're only going to save yourself a couple actions at most if you play Deciphered Reality. Still, saving yourself a couple actions will speed up your tempo, so I think it's still worth playing Deciphered Reality in that scenario. Deciphered Reality is an extremely powerful card that allows Seekers to compress a lot of skill tests into a single test for a big reward. I think the designers have done a great job at balancing it though, since it does cost 4 resources, which might be problematic in solo play. I don't think this card is essential for Seekers, since it can be very scenario dependent. I suspect this card is going to be much more appealing to players on their second trip through a campaign than their first, since you'll know ahead of time where you can abuse it and where you can pitch it to a skill test. The first rogue card in the pack is Chicago Typewriter. It's a 5-cost asset that costs 4 experience points. It has 2 combat icons, the item, weapon, firearm, and illicit traits, and it takes up your 2 hand slots. It comes with 4 ammo and the game text, Action. Spend 1 ammo. Fight. You may spend any number of additional actions when you perform this attack. You get +2 combat for this attack for each action being spent, including this ability's action cost. This attack deals +2 damage. Now, the Chicago Typewriter was spoiled in the preview article for Lost in Time of Space, and it's a rock-solid addition to the Rogue's arsenal. 4 ammo, +2 combat, and +2 damage is a very respectable stat line compared to other powerful weapons, such as the shotgun for the Guardian class. The Typewriter also plays nicely into the Rogue theme of generating action advantage. An investigator like Skid's O'Toole can spend 2 resources to gain an extra action, which he can spend to boost his combat by an additional 2 if he needs a little extra help taking down some of the tougher enemies in the game. You could even play a card like Quick Thinking from Undimensioned and Unseen during the skill test to try to get that action back if you succeed by 2 or more. I really like the Chicago Typewriter. I'm glad the designers gave rogues a powerful weapon that doesn't rely on any gimmicks or require them to jump through any hoops. This is a great card, and it's going to really help rogues pull their weight in combat. The second rogue card in the pack is the Gold Pocket Watch, Stealing Time. It's a 2-cost asset that takes up the accessory slot. It's exceptional, so it costs 8. Yes, 8 experience points. It has a willpower and wild icon and the item and relic traits. And it has 2 free triggers, When a phase begins, remove the gold pocket watch from the game, skip this phase, and after a phase ends, remove the gold pocket watch from the game to repeat that phase. 8 experience points. That is a huge chunk of change to drop on a single card. Is it worth it? I think so. This card is exceptionally powerful, versatile, and useful during almost every phase of the game. Are you one doom away from losing the game? Skip the Mythos phase. Does your team of 4 investigators need an extra action or 2 to guarantee the victory? How does 12 actions sound? Is a boss or hunter enemy about to wreck you? Skip the enemy phase. Need extra cards and resources to fuel your investigation? Repeat the upkeep phase. Of course, you could also use this card to grief your fellow investigators by repeating the Mythos or enemy phases, but I hope you'll use the gold pocket watch for good rather than evil. If you're going to spend 8 experience points on a card, you're going to want something powerful in return, and I think the gold pocket watch gives an investigator unprecedented control over the phase sequence of a turn, which is really one of the most powerful effects that you can ask for in any type of game. The gold pocket watch is by no means essential to victory, but it's a pretty sweet trinket to have in your back pocket if you can afford it. The first Mystic card in the pack is the level 5 version of Shrivelling from the core set. It's a 3-cost asset that costs 5 experience points and has a willpower icon and 2 combat icons. It's a spell that has 4 charges and takes up the arcane slot. It has the ability Action, spend 1 charge, Fight. This attack uses willpower instead of combat. You get +3 willpower and deal +2 damage for this attack. If a skull, cultist, tablet, elder thing, or tentacle symbol is revealed during this attack, take 2 horror. Now, the level 3 version of Shrivelling was released in the Essex County Express, and I think this card is better in almost every way. For 2 extra experience points, you get an extra combat icon, an extra willpower on the skill test, and an extra damage if you succeed. You also take an extra horror if you pull one of the special symbols, but I think the rewards are definitely worth the risk. The extra combat icon isn't that important, but the extra willpower and damage are essential as the enemies become more challenging later on during the Dunwich Legacy cycle. The only reason I can think of buying the level 3 version of Shrivelling before this is that you're tight on experience and can't afford to upgrade to the level 5 version in one shot. There's not much else to say about Shrivelling. The core set version is a staple in Agnes and Jim decks, as well as quite a few Daisy decks. If you're playing Agnes or Jim and you need to kill enemies efficiently and effectively, this card's going to go in your deck and you're not going to think too much about it. The next Mystic card in the pack is the level 5 version of Ward of Protection from the core set. It's a 1-cost event that costs 5 experience points and has a willpower and wild icon. It has the spell and spirit traits and the game text Fast. Play when you draw a non-weakness encounter card. Cancel all of that card's effects and discard it. Then take 1 horror. Now this card is incredibly powerful. If you absolutely positively need to cancel an encounter card, the level 5 version of Ward of Protection has got you covered. Anybody who has played the Lord of the Rings LCG knows how irritating the surge keyword can be, especially if it triggers a chain reaction, drowning you in encounter cards. The level 5 version of Ward of Protection stops that dead in its tracks. Ward of Protection is similar to Monster Slayer from earlier in the pack in that it also allows you to basically kill an enemy before it hits the table for 1 horror. That saves you time and charges in the long run, and it doesn't require a skill test, which makes this card more appealing if you're playing on hard or expert difficulty. Now, is it worth paying 5 experience points to prevent a treachery from surging or canceling an enemy? I'm not convinced it's worth it to cancel Surge, which is a relatively rare effect in Arkham Horror LCG so far. As far as enemies are concerned, Agnes and Jim could fall back on the level 0 version of Shrivelling from the core set and use this to cancel enemies that would be a real pain to handle. I'm thinking enemies with high hit point totals and whatnot that would use up a lot of charges. I suspect you're probably going to end up canceling a treachery with this card most of the time, which kind of defeats the purpose of upgrading to it. I'm really glad a card like this exists, but it feels more like an expensive luxury than a necessity. The level 0 version of Ward of Protection is more than adequate in most circumstances if you're playing on standard difficulty. Players who enjoy Hard or Expert may want to consider this one because it's a convenient way to deal with an enemy without making a skill test. Unless Surge becomes a huge hassle or the designers release an enemy that will absolutely wreck me if it's allowed to hit the table, I think I'm going to take a pass on this one for the time being. The first Survivor card in the pack is the level 3 version of AQUINNAH, the Forgotten Daughter, who was released in the core set. She is a 4-cost asset that costs 3 experience points. She has willpower and agility icons, 1 health and 4 sanity, and she takes up the ally slot. She has the response, when an enemy attacks you, exhaust AQUINNAH and deal 1 horror to her. Deal that enemy's damage to an enemy at your location instead. You still take the horror dealt by the attack. Ah, poor AQUINNAH, the forgotten card from the core set. I've never put AQUINNAH in one of my decks, and judging from the posts on the various forums and decks posted on Arkham DB, I'm not the only one who struggled to find a use for her. The level 1 version of AQUINNAH costs 5 resources and only allowed you to deal the enemy's damage to another enemy at your location. If you're playing in solo, it's rare indeed to have more than 1 enemy at your location at a time. I'm not sure it's all that common in multiplayer either, which means AQUINNAH is basically a blank ally with a huge pool of sanity. Now you might consider playing her just for that if she didn't compete for the ally slot with either version of Peter Sylvester, who comes with a nice pool of sanity and can heal sanity from himself as well. I can't imagine any player paying 3 experience for charisma from the Essex County Express to play both, so AQUINNAH doesn't see a lot of love. Now, this version of AQUINNAH is much better. She's cheaper to play by a resource, and she allows you to deal the enemy's damage to any enemy at your location. Honestly, I'm not sure why you would pick up the core set version over this one, which has a relevant ability. But is AQUINNAH any good? I sat down and tried to think of ways to leverage it, and I have to be honest, AQUINNAH won me over. Her ability is somewhat situational, but I think you could find enough uses for her during a campaign to make her worthy of consideration. First, AQUINNAH is great if the damage from that attack is enough to kill the enemy. Say you're playing The House Always Wins or Blood on the Altar, and you draw O'Banion's Thug during the Mythos phase. AQUINNAH lets you take any action you want during the following turn, and the Thug will die as soon as it makes an attack of opportunity. AQUINNAH saves you the trouble of killing the Thug, which improves your tempo. You can also do the same trick against the Servant of Many Mouths in Blood on the Altar. Move to the servant's location and investigate. AQUINNAH kills the servant during the attack of opportunity, and you gain 2 clues. That is a pretty good deal. Obviously, the same trick works against acolytes, swamp leeches, and swarms of rats. If AQUINNAH could kill whippoorwills, I'd give her an A+ immediately. Unfortunately, those evil birds only do sanity damage. AQUINNAH can also be helpful against the enemies she can't kill outright, especially if they have odd health totals. If you're able to do a couple of damage to a Lupine Thrall, Grappling Horror, or Devotee of the Key, AQUINNAH can take 2 horror to chip in the 3rd damage, saving you an action. AQUINNAH won't be able to pull that trick off more than a couple times a game unless you team her up with Peter Sylvester, but those 2 actions might be enough to advance the act and win the game. AQUINNAH can even lend a hand against some of the game's bosses. At full health, she'll let you stand toe-to-toe with the likes of Umordoth, Silas Bishop, or Snidathqua for a turn or 2, and hammer them for a considerable amount of damage to boot. Now, I was prepared to write off AQUINNAH when I saw her, but I think she's at least worth a look. She can provide Ashcan Pete and Wendy Adams with a limited form of action advantage, and prevent some damage along the way. I think she'll become a really interesting card to play around with if survivors ever get access to a card that can heal horror on allies. The second survivor card in the pack is Try and Try Again. It's a 2-cost asset that costs 3 experience points. It has 2 willpower icons, the talent trait, and the game text response. After a skill test is failed, if a skill card you own is committed to that test, exhaust Try and Try Again. Return that skill card to your hand. Now, I've gone back and forth on this card more than any other in this Mythos pack, and to be perfectly honest, I'm still not sure where I stand on it. While I've been hoping the designers would create a card with this type of effect since I failed my first skill test, Try and Try Again feels like it's too expensive for what it does, and the stars need to align just right for it to be effective. Try Again effect is similar to that of Rabbit's Foot from the core set in that both cards reward you with a card for failing a skill test. Try and Try Again is more specialized in that you know exactly which card you're getting back. With Rabbit's Foot, you're really at the mercy of the luck of the draw. Now, I'm not going to argue about the relative merits of Rabbit's Foot here. If you're interested in that debate, I recommend you check out Chris Mooney's article, Rabbit's Foot, What Is It Worth?, on the Mythos Busters website. Mooney makes a pretty compelling argument in favor of including at least one copy of Rabbit's Foot in your survivor deck, and I think you could make a similar argument for Try and Try Again. If you fail a skill test, Try and Try Again rewards you with a skill card, which I think you'll agree is a lot better than nothing. The main problem I have with Try and Try Again is that you need to pay 3 experience points to guarantee that you'll get that skill card back. If I'm paying 3 experience points for a card, I expect a pretty powerful effect in return, and this feels a little bit lackluster. If all you care about is replacing the card you pitched to a test, you're better off saving your experience and playing Rabbit's Foot instead. The other problem with Try and Try Again is that it's effectively blank unless you commit at least 1 skill card to a test. That's not the case with Rabbit's Foot, which will reward you with a card regardless of the cards you pitched to the failed test. I really want to like Try and Try Again, but 3 experience points just feels like a lot to pay for this type of effect. The fact that Try and Try Again doesn't reward you with a card unless you've committed a skill card to a test is another strike against it. I get the feeling that Try and Try Again won't see a lot of play if survivors get more powerful options to spend their hard-earned experience on. The final card in the pack is the Red Gloved Man. He was never there. He's a 2-cost asset that costs 5 experience points. He comes with a wild icon and the ally and conspirator traits. He takes up the ally slot and has 4 health and 4 sanity. He's fast and has the response after the Red Gloved Man enters play. Choose 2 of your skills. While the Red Gloved Man is in play, raise the base value of each of those skills to 6. And he has the forced effect at the end of the Mythos phase, discard the Red Gloved Man. Wow, what a way to end the cycle. The Red Gloved Man is among my favorite conspirators from the Call of Cthulhu LCG. He's that cool, mysterious character with hidden motives operating in the shadows. Needless to say, I was thrilled when FFG spoiled him just before the release of Lost in Time and Space, and he does not disappoint. The Red Gloved Man is an amazing ally. He's fast, which comes in extremely handy if you're staring down an enemy. He'll raise the base value of 2 of your skills to 6, and he can absorb a ton of punishment from almost any enemy currently in the game. And he only costs 2 resources. That's insane. Of course, all this power comes with a pretty hefty downside. The Red Gloved Man will only stick around until the end of the following Mythos phase, so you'll probably want to save him for those times when the game is on the line. The Red Gloved Man is so powerful that players are going to be on the lookout for ways to abuse him as more cards are released. Now, investigators who can pick up a copy or 2 of a chance encounter are in the best position at the moment to abuse the Red Gloved Man. This could get particularly ugly in multiplayer if several players are packing a chance encounter to bounce a copy of the Red Gloved Man in and out of play. A chance encounter is an event, so Wendy Adams can abuse it. Between 2 copies of a chance encounter, Wendy's amulet, and a little luck, Adams could bring the red-gloved man into play up to 5 times in one game. At that point, it's almost like he's a permanent fixture on the board. Another way to keep the red-gloved man in play is with the gold pocket watch, which we saw earlier in this Mythos pack. The combo will set you back at least 13 experience points, but you do get to keep the red-gloved man in play for 2 turns, which might be enough in itself to win you the game. The red-gloved man is a fitting close to the Dunwich Legacy cycle. He is an incredibly powerful ally, and players are going to take a close look at any card in the future that references allies to see whether they can use that card to abuse the red-gloved man. That concludes my review of the player cards from Lost in Time and Space. Overall, I really like this Mythos pack. There are a lot of extremely powerful, expensive cards in here, which will force players to make some tough choices when they're upgrading their decks during a campaign. That said, I don't consider many of the cards in this pack to be absolutely essential to your success. They're more like alternative paths to victory. Players who enjoy hard or expert difficulty will find a lot to like here, with cards like Monster Slayer, the Lightning Gun, Deciphered Reality, and the level 5 version of Ward of Protection, either eliminating the need for skill tests or compressing those skill tests down so you're drawing less from the Chaos Bag. Overall, I'm really impressed with the Dunwich Legacy cycle. There were very few cards that I would consider duds that were released over the course of the 6 Mythos packs, so I'm really looking forward to what the designers have in store for us once Path to Carcosa drops in the next month or so. That's going to do it for me today. If you enjoyed this review, I would appreciate it if you could leave me a thumbs up. It helps the channel out a great deal by making it more visible on YouTube. Do you agree or disagree with my review, or you just want to chat about this great game? Please leave a comment down below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to be notified of when I release future content. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up once Path to Carcosa drops here shortly. If you'd like to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.